Well, we're quantum computers. Even if you don't know anything about quantum computers, we're quantum computers. And so how is that possible? And what does that mean? The whole field that everybody's working on right now is artificial intelligence. And that is with the presupposition that the brain is a classical computer. But if you realize humans are quantum computers, then all of a sudden the formula changes because you can't build an artificial intelligence machine. It's like a quantum version of the matrix. This infrastructure, this layer in physics, it's powerful enough to simulate anything, including the entire physical universe. We are eternal beings because these quantum dimensions have no space and no time. So if our mind is made of the same stuff, then it is eternal.
The episode you're about to watch has been republished. My podcast channel reaches a lot more people now, and there's certain episodes that have slipped under the radar, and I wanted to bring them up for your attention because I truly feel they are worth listening to. So please be sure to let me know what you think of this episode in the comments below. And of course, let's continue to connect. Let me know where you are in the world and where you're listening and tuning in from. I love reading it. It's amazing, isn't it, that we can do this? And the other thing I want to say as well is find out where we are if you want to put your spiritual boots on and come and join us at one of our 5-day retreats or one-day events around the world. Links are below as well if you want to find out more what we're up to. Much love from me. Enjoy.
Oh, beautiful. Quantum Doug, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
I chatting to you off air as well. This is going to be an absolutely fascinating conversation today. I in all honesty, Doug, I get a bit nervous sometimes when I bring scientists on and around the research because it can get so deep so fast and even just trying to keep up in them levels. But you seem like a really nice guy, so I'm sure you'll go easy on me today.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, that's why I wrote the book. If you really need the gory details, then go look at the book. But the goal is here to try to convince you to go read the book in spite of the gory details in the book.
but both are needed. Both are needed in this day and age, exactly. 100%. Yeah. But I'll start the show like I always do, and that is if you were at an intimate dinner right now and you sat next to a complete stranger and they asked you what you did for a living, what would you say?
Well, I'm actually a professional programmer and electrical engineer by trade. So, but my passion is quantum computing. And so I usually lead off with that kind of statement and see where they, what level of interest they have in that subject, in that biting. And then I usually say something like, well, we're quantum computers. Humans are quantum computers. Even if you don't know anything about quantum computers, we're quantum computers. And so how is that possible? And what does that mean? So once you realize everybody is a quantum computer, right? Then and the reason I say that is because we, in the same way that quantum computers have behaviors that are not possible with classical computers, and I can go into great detail about that, humans have behaviors that are not possible with a classical computer also, the whole metaphysics area. So, and you say, okay, but my goal here is, and the intuition and sort of my intuition and my guides, if you want to call it that, taught to me about this for years and years and years, saying, okay, let's connect those two. So thought, and quantum computing are related to how we're metaphysical, right? So that's
right.
And so people who automatically discount metaphysics, especially if you tie quantum computing to it or quantum physics to it, I'm trying to make that bridge that says it's not metaphysics, it's proto-physics, it's the normal physics. This is how we're intelligent. So I use the term real intelligence to talk about it, to differentiate it from artificial intelligence, which nobody, that's the whole field that everybody's working on right now is artificial intelligence. And that is with the presupposition that the brain is a classical computer. And so therefore we can mimic it, right?
Yeah.
But if you realize humans are quantum computers, then all of a sudden the formula changes because you can't build an artificial intelligence machine, right? So, so that's kind of how I sort of like dance around the topics and see which part of the subject they're interested in. So I'll do the same to you and see which part of the subject you're interested in.
No, totally. And it is mind blowing. And it's like, I often wonder because the old me, like, because we were talking about it here and I was sharing some of my experiences and why I'm so passionate about this work now. And like, but if the old me from Wales, 20 years ago, heard what you just said, it would have just be like, it just would not land. But the fact that I've been exploring the inner work and connecting to the aspect of ourselves that is the metaphysical, is that part that we can't seem to measure or quantify. But at the same time, in my world, it is as real as this conversation, as seeing you across. So for me, it's so important that we're able to start to bridge these and have people like yourself write books that take, apparently you said 20 years to write your book?
I've been threatening to write a book for 20 years, and then I actually took 5 years to write it. So.
Right, okay. which is just nuts, and... The one thing, because if I want to break this down as simple as possible for a moment, and that's even the word quantum, because even if I go to a workshop where we hold a meditation workshop, and I love to speak to the science and the people that I've had on the podcast that are sharing different aspects to try and create a bit of a different meaning around why we have practices and do the work. Right. But literally out of 50 people, only a small handful will even put their hand up that they've even heard of the word. And this is people wanting to learn the work.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
How would you even define that, quantum?
Well, see, ultimately, that's why the name of the book, part of this is all because I wrote this book, right, called Deep Reality.
Right.
And the good news is my publisher came up with that title, which was good because I probably wouldn't have come up with that good title. But the idea is that deep reality I use the analogy that says, everybody knows about their car, right? They know that it has a engine, it has a transmission, it has a carburetor, it has fuel pump, anti-lock brakes, electronic ignition. So everybody's a buzzword engineer about their car. They couldn't fix it, they couldn't design it, they couldn't build it. Some people can't barely drive it, right? But yet they know about the car. So my goal is to sort of like get the buzzword engineering terms about human mind so that everybody's familiar with it, even though they don't know how to meditate yet, or how to have an astral projection, or how, it's the same metaphor as getting familiar with the terminology of your car. So.
Got it. Okay.
So then the aspect of the quantum then is that it's the fundamental aspect of how the universe is created. So there are many physicists much smarter than I am who says, Feynman said, the world is quantum mechanical. Damn it, it's not classical. So if you believe that and you realize that quantum is fundamentally different than classical computing and classical physics, then you go, well, if it's that powerful and it's the basis of all of physics, well, why isn't it also the basis of mind? Okay. And so we just had to stop talking about quantum computing and quantum physics from a physics perspective and start talking about it from an information perspective. Okay. And if you look at anything that's going on with like transcendent experiences, even things like law of attraction and infinite intelligence, all of those concepts, what do they all have in common? They have nothing to do with energy, have everything to do with information and computer science kinds of ideas, right? So that's what the book is doing. It's kind of connecting. It's saying, look, the old domain, the classical physical universe is all about energy. But the mental domain in the quantum physics is all about information, and let's talk about the information. So this particle wave duality, energy information duality, we're focusing in on the information side and starting to have the conversation about the information. And most transcendent experiences, you can't explain by, quote, energy. You have to explain it as some informational process, like astral projection or remote viewing. You have to say, okay, there's a mechanism there, but it's primarily informational, right?
Yeah.
And so that's where I'm coming from, is the physics is the basis for the source of everything in the physical universe. And so I call it source science. And the source science is the basis for our mind too. So that's what ties it together. So.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. And for me, when I hear you speak, it's like it feels like we're taking the woo out of the woo-woo, and we're actually then taking the science and really starting to meet these aspects from both ways. Because once we start to have language and an information and a process to bridge that gap, it really allows us to then lean into this as opposed to dismiss it without even looking at it, which I think
absolutely,
as Westerners, we get encouraged. I don't know if it's encouraged is the right word, but it's just not in our radar for many people.
Yeah. Well, in the UK, they're probably more keen on metaphysics just because of the history of a lot of metaphysics research was done in the UK, right? But in the US, it's really the critics and the physics people and the critics and the classical physicists people that are the people who are attacking. They're the attack dogs of the industry, right? And so, but even the people who invented quantum mechanics, they all believed that there was something bigger than classical physics, not only from the quantum physics, but consciousness. A lot of those people talked about consciousness too. So
yeah, and you talk about universal mind and mind as well. I've heard you mention that a couple of times. I want to pick you up on that. And what's your thoughts about our mind then? Because I know there's a lot of theory about the fact that the brain is more of a receiver as opposed to creating consciousness. And what are your thoughts on this? And what's your research led you to believe?
Absolutely. Well, once you realize that a lot of these behaviors that we have for metaphysical behaviors, right, like astral projection and remote viewing and retrocausation, they don't deal with normal space and time, right? They violate what we would consider, if you have a remote viewing session, you're violating what we know about classical physics because you're looking at something that's remote. So how is that possible? And the same thing with precognition. If you have a remote viewing experience and an experiment even that they've done where you're looking forward in time and you're looking at a newspaper from 2 days from now and you're describing what's going to be in that newspaper from 2 days from now, how is it possible to do that, both in space and time? So you have to have a mechanism. As an engineer, I'm just saying, you have to have a mechanism, some way that's allowed, right? And it turns out quantum mechanics can do that. And the way it does that is that the fundamentals of quantum mechanics is that says that every quantum system has these own independent little private dimensions. And it turns out, that's what I did for my dissertation, was show that those dimensions were literally bits. In other words, it's not just the bits that we have in computer science, but this is the bits of physics. That's why I call it bit physics now. And it basically says that physics owns bits as well. And once you start realizing, there's a bit infrastructure in physics to support quantum mechanics, and that's what I did my PhD on, showed that you can do quantum computing using bit physics, using a different kind of math called geometric algebra. And you can show that it produces qubits and ebits and standard model and all this other good stuff. So once you realize, these bits, what are they though? They're an infinite dimensional, hyperdimensional space where each little thing is like a little toothpick, but there are an infinity of them. And those are the dimensions that form the substrate of the physical universe.
Right.
Does that make sense? So it's like the Matrix. It's like a quantum version of the Matrix. Okay, the movie The Matrix, where you have this infrastructure, this layer in physics that is an infinite dimensional, hyperdimensional bit physics domain. And in that, it's powerful enough to simulate anything, including the entire physical universe.
Wow.
So our classical universe essentially is simulating running on that giant simulator.
There's a word I want to pick you up on, hyperdimensional, and I'd love to break that down a little bit more, because what you just said made me think of my interview with Professor Donald Hoffman I had on last year, and he the case against reality, and he spoke about something giving rise to physical form, and I kind of that's what I'm thinking. So what does hyperdimensional mean? Does that mean it's coming out in and out of our 3D reality to something beyond? Or?
Well, I mean, you're familiar with flat world ideas, right? Where you have a two-dimensional world, and there's some good YouTube videos out there by Fred Alan Wolf about flat world. Right. Okay, so you essentially imagine if everybody was a two-dimensional being, they would just live in a plane, right? Us as a three-dimensional being would be able to look down on top of them and see inside them, outside of them, see their house, inside their house and outside the house at the same time, right? And they wouldn't be able to see us because we're outside of we're in an extra dimension that they can't see, right? So if you take that analogy and raise it up one level, it says, okay, now imagine that we're in a three-dimensional box, and now there's a four-dimensional being that can actually come down and look at us the same way. That's what Cubist art was all about. Cubist art was all about looking at both sides of the woman's face at the same time.
Huh.
Okay. So once you start realizing, how do artists represent multi-dimensional, higher dimensional spaces? Well, now I imagine that you have an infinity of those dimensions, but they weren't full-fledged dimensions like we were, these tiny little proto-dimensions, and they're made basically bits. So it's like a computing infrastructure for the simulator that runs the universe on it. And it turns out that it's a powerful thing to do. You can build things with that, including space, time, matter, energy, just using a bit infrastructure. Okay, and there's other people that are working on this idea as well. So does that make sense? So so it's hard for people to imagine if they can go from a 2-dimensional to a 3-dimensional, and then from a 3-dimensional to 4-dimensional. You kind of get the idea of what I'm talking about. And so one of if you want to think of it, my superpowers is that I can visualize this hyperdimensional space without getting lost.
Got it.
Okay.
There's this thing I remember when you mentioned Fred Alan Wolf there, and there's a fantastic cartoon on YouTube with like Dr. Quantum.
Yes.
I'll link it in the show notes. I remember watching that a couple of years ago, thinking, that's a really great way of looking at it. And I'd encourage everyone.
He does great.
Of that very thing where we rise in above dimension. So are you saying that every time we rise above, that can be infinite back to source?
You essentially, if it turns out that each qubit, so we have bits, okay, and each qubit can have 2 of those dimensions in it. That's what I showed for my dissertation. Right. But then it turns out to build an entangled bit, you have to have 2 qubits. So that means every entangled bit, and this is the same no matter which math you use, you have to have a 4-dimensional space. Well, it's just like you can't represent a sphere in flatland because there's not another dimension for it. It's a 2-dimensional thing, right? All you can show is the shadow of it on 2 dimensions, right? So the same thing is true. If you have a 4-dimensional space, you can't show it in 3 dimensions, right? And so that's the problem with it is you can't represent higher dimensional spaces in lower dimensional spaces.
Right.
For example, if you have a 2-dimensional space, and there's properties associated with the number of dimensions. If you have a 2-dimensional space, you cannot create a knot in it because you have to have a 3rd dimension to loop it. So once you have a 3-dimensional space, you can make a knot. But if you have a 4-dimensional space, then the knot has an extra dimension and you can pull it out like a magician's loop.
Wow. Yeah.
Okay. So the properties of what we think about as physics has totally to do with the standard, our unassuming that we don't even realize that we're doing it. We're just unconsciously thinking it's a 3-dimensional space. Right.
It's amazing. Yeah. And because we're so conditioned to think linearly, aren't we? Like everything,
Well, and 3-dimensional.
Yeah, and 3-dimensional. Linear and 3,
Yeah. Every E-bit, it turns out, is 4 dimensions. Well, where is it then? So that's what's so spooky action at a distance about E-bits.
Can you explain that then?
Because it cheats.
Yeah. Entanglement.
So an entangled bit is where you take a single photon and you put it through this crystal and it generates a pair of lower energy photons that are in a specially way talking to each other. Okay, they're a combined set. So if you were to do this with coins, you would say, if I flip, these coins are in special communications that anytime I flip either coin, the other one's going to be the opposite of it, no matter how far apart they are.
Right. Yeah.
Okay, that's what's called entanglement. Okay, and so the thing is that you can have them light years apart, and instantly, if you flip one coin, the other one's going to be the opposite. And there's no local communications between them. And in fact, there can't be because they're a light year apart. So Einstein didn't like this. He called it spooky action at a distance, right? But the reason it works is because it's a 4-dimensional thing. It has this extra connection that you can't simulate in 3 dimensions. In fact, even Feynman says the best way to simulate a quantum system is to use a quantum system because you can't do it with a classical system.
Yeah, wow.
So this is tying all these ideas, obviously takes a little while to start getting anybody's head around. which is why I had to write a 350-page book. It's elevator speech doesn't do it, right?
And also, I think, like for me, Perkin, like I've been very passionate about this work for years now, and each year rolls by, I'm learning more and more about myself and realize I actually know nothing. And the more I learn, the more I actually don't know. And
yeah, that's a good sign.
Yeah, I guess. And I've had enough. I don't talk about it too often because I don't want to be other people's experiences, but I've had enough mystical experiences and enough even out of body experiences that have made me come back and go, wow, it's like I've got a new reference point. And from that new reference point, it allows me to come and then look at this information and the things that you're speaking about.
Yeah.
And it's like there's a part of my ego that's dissolved and disintegrated that's allowing me to really try and understand what's happening, as opposed to just shutting down before even hearing what you have to say, you know. And
yeah. So I have one more thing to add about the hyperdimensional definition. So once you have at least 4 dimensions, which you can't represent inside 3-dimensional space, you just can't, right? It's the same problem with the flatland, right? So if you have, let's say, 100 EBITs, well, then you have 400 dimensions. Well, where do you put those 400 dimensions? When I say a dimension, I mean that mathematically they're not like bits stored in a 3-dimensional space. They're actually their own independent dimensions, 400 dimensions that are orthogonal to each other. In other words, you have up, down, north, south, east, and west, and another 99 or 396 other dimensions that are other directions to go in. Okay. You can't simulate that in a lower dimensional space. So that's this quantum computer I'm talking about, that is the infrastructure, and it's outside of space and it's outside of time. Why do I say that? It's because it has a kind of concurrency that precedes what we know about as time. So it's massively parallel. And in fact, it's big enough to simulate the entire universe in.
Wow.
Which includes black holes, supernovas, atomic bombs. You know the difference between a simulator and a here's an example of how you can determine a simulator, right? If you have a simulation of an atomic bomb, you can do it all you want, do all the thing, but the computer doesn't melt. The simulation is independent of the computing infrastructure, right? But if you have an actual atomic bomb, then the energy is released and it releases all this energy. Now you could simulate all that energy release, but it wouldn't melt the computer. Well, the same thing is true with quantum physics world. You can have an atomic bomb and it doesn't melt the simulator that's running the atomic bomb in our physical world.
Yeah.
So I believe that we are running a simulator that's so powerful it can simulate nuclear events.
Yeah. Wow.
And that's pretty powerful. And supernovas and black holes and everything else that we see in physics. So
as a science community and evolution of humanity, what are we doing with this information, and where can we take this as we learn more? Because if there's a subtle energy that's beyond space and time that's given rise to life, are we able to tap into that? Are we able to bring that more into our lives? Are we able to then change
that's
the direction?
Back half of my book is like, if you understand this, you realize you can have mystical experiences, and it's not the, we're born, we live, we die, and that's the end of it. We are eternal beings, because these quantum dimensions have no space and no time in them. So if our mind is made of the same stuff, then it is eternal.
Yeah.
Right. And it has to be that way. We don't have to invent anything new for metaphysics, because quantum physics is powerful enough already to do everything we need to. We just have to talk about it in the right way. And once you do that, you can create predictions about other experiments that you can do. And that's what my co-author, Bill Tiller, did for he had a lab for many years that he got funded to study interesting ways of looking at physics experiments. Okay. And so that's part of the story of the book, is making sure people understand what his contribution was to society. So
yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. It does. And with you on your own journey, because for me, chatting to you, you're a rare breed, I believe, honestly, you're extremely passionate about the science, but clearly you have a very deep connection to your own spiritual work as well. Yeah.
Spiritual side.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I meditate every day for 15 years.
So which for you came first?
I think I was technology as a kid, they didn't have computers when I was born, right? Barely, And so by the time I was in high school, I ended up going to the technical college to learn computer programming. This was in high school. Okay. And this was in 1967. Nobody had computers, personal computers that they could use. So I was using a technical college computer, but then it was one that was on the side. Nobody was using it. So I had a personal computer in 1967 that nobody else could get access to, So I was like learning about computers from very young. So I lived and breathed computers since 1967. And so I look at everything from an information and computer perspective. And then I realized, well, metaphysics doesn't solve that problem. It doesn't fit into that model. So I'm looking all of that from an information perspective too. And so I think everything that I've done for my book essentially was guided by spirit, because that was sort of my path. That was my destiny, is to connect these two. So which came first? I think I look at stuff that I wrote in the 80s and in the 90s and even 10 years ago. It's the same stuff I'm saying now in my book, but I didn't even know I knew it back then.
Yeah.
So does that help?
Explain totally. I'm always fascinated.
Yeah.
I'm always fascinated. And from your experiences then, and looking at both and moving forward, what do you think? And I think about the majority of people that we work with here in Australia and I guess we're always kind of looking for answers and wondering why has this happened, and there's always trauma or there's healing to be required. There's a pain that drives people forward into this work. Not always, but generally. What are the implications then if we begin to fully understand what you're saying from the science perspective? Then what could that do to us to help support us when it comes to healing ourselves? And healing's such a broad term; it can create so much meaning for anyone anyway. So I don't want to get caught in that trap. But if we are information, are we able to get to that source information to actually affect the physical aspects of ourselves to help support us moving forward?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, because if you look at dreams, right? People who have lucid dreams and stuff like that, that's probably the easiest gateway to get into this. Okay. Because then all of a sudden you're experiencing this people who have near-death experience have a transcendent experience, right? And then they come back and they're changed permanently. Or if they have a Kundalini awaken, they're changed permanently, right? But if you can taste that without having to die, right? By having lucid dreamings, right? And so once you realize, oh, the universe is essentially I can have a virtual reality in my dream every night, and I can do whatever I want, and I can be resting and doing adventures at the same time and learning things. If everybody could get to that point as a society, if everybody could have what I call tasting the divine, that they tasted the divine, having this some kind of mystical experience, then they would realize, oh, the universe isn't the way they teach us that the universe is, that it's really this fundamental thing. So people use the term, there's two terms that I try to not use. One is, even though my co-author invented the term subtle energy, in the 90s, he came up with that term. I don't like it because it's talking about energy like humans are a battery, right? But we're not. We're more like an information computer than we are a battery, right? So there's that term, that subtle energy term, but also energy is the wrong terminology. Nobody's come up with a good term for what subtle energy is. So I tend to like the term prana, because at least in the West, it's not something that has an energy context to it, right? So anyhow, so that's the other term so I use the word prana rather than subtle energy. And I also talk about, the other thing is that people who are interested in God say, well, God is all powerful and all knowing, right? But God isn't a bomb, right? But if you're all knowing, you're probably all powerful too. So again, it's the information side of it is the powerful side of it. Okay, so
yeah. No, it does. And so if we use the term prana and then bring prana into our bodies, do you think then the more prana we have, the more life force we have, then the greater, the richer the experience that we're having here?
Yes, I believe that the prana is these hyperdimensional space, and the auras that we see. An aura is really a measure of the number of dimensions that we have as part of our spiritual self. And the more dimensions we have, the brighter we are. But it's not again like a battery. It's more like a complexity. If you look at the chakras, they have the lower level chakras have a few petals. And as you go up the petals, it has more and more petals as you go up the chakras, right? Well, that's a measure of the complexity of that state of consciousness. Okay. So what we just have to do is we have to include more dimensions in it so that we rise above our 4-dimensional space. And eventually we're going to be spending all of our time in this higher dimensional space. And it's kind of like heaven on earth. It's like we're in both. We're not stuck in 3 dimensions anymore. We're more in this hyperdimensional space. We're more insightful. We can have non-local communications with other people, with other things. That's our mind is really in that domain. So our higher self is there. We're tapping into the future and the past there. Those are all things that we can do if we increase our dimensionality, increase the prana, and then we're more in balance.
I'm just thinking, for some reason, I can hear a few skeptics sitting there in the car listening to this right now going, yeah, that all sounds great, but is that possible? Have you met people that are doing these things?
Absolutely. I have real good friends of mine that I even talk about in the book, healers and remote viewers. And I've done experiments with many of these and research. And how can a healer who's working with an MD for 30 years, be anything but real, right?
Totally. Yeah.
You're right. And she has people from all over the world coming to Dallas to be with her because regular medicine doesn't have anything else to do with them. She had this one person who came with a care flight from Spain and then spent months with her and then went back normally. Was that you can do this kind of things, right? You can have instant healing. The person who did Healed by the Light, Majrani, who had a near-death experience and then was cured of cancer afterwards. It's like, yeah, exactly. So, and even Alexander, he's an MD. There's all these people that probably shouldn't be alive. Angels in the OR, kind of. Those are another example. So, I think there's these higher. If you look at these higher dimensions, they have a lot of properties that we're not used to in the classical world, such as order. Entropy is a 3-dimensional concept. It's an energy concept. It's about disorder. But if you're in a higher dimensional context, you don't have a 3-dimensional limit. You're not bound by energy. So you can reorder things and it shows up as more order rather than less order. We would call that healing, or we would call it negative entropy. So you can start at least mathematically talking about it and saying, That's one of the things that my co-author did, is he showed that you can change the pH of water with an intention. And not only can you change the pH of water with an intention, you can store that intention in an electronic device called an intention host device. And that intention host device can be in the lab, telling the water to either go up a pH or down a pH. Wow. And it works. So if you can change, if thought can be encoded in a structure and then use it to affect the physical world, this is what my co-author said. He says it completely defeated Descartes' assumption that the mind does not affect the physical world. So again, there's all this science based on it that's kind of baked in with our classical worldview. As soon as you kind of started dissolving all of that, all of a sudden you go, well, and then anything's possible. Law of attraction kind of.
Which was going to be my next question, because how much then is, because you often hear the way we think and the way we feel is creating our reality, and so the way, the state of being, the way we are being, we tend to attract more of. I mean, I'd love to hear your thoughts on all of this.
Yeah. Well, first of all, law of attraction. I mean, I've studied it a long time.
Okay.
I love Esther Hicks, okay, and Abraham, okay. So I've studied. I've got a stack of CDs this tall of hers that I've been getting every month, and listening to. And I would just listen to it in the car because I would want to be ingrained in that kind of thinking, and I didn't have enough sources for it anywhere else, over the last 20 years. Okay, so but the idea that law of attraction says you can have similar things, like birds of a feather, like-minded things are attracted to each other. Okay, well, again, there is no magnetics that did that. There are no electromagnetics that does that. There are no forces in nature that physics can point to that is a mechanism for attracting things of similar meaning. Why? It's because we don't understand what meaning is. Meaning is the fundamental idea of what I would call real intelligence. Humans are the source of meaning, and meaning comes from this hyperdimensional space.
Okay.
And if you don't have a hyperdimensional space, you really don't have meaning. So all we can simulate is this mathematical thing. We say, well, we're going to attach this label to this thing, and we say, well, it's going to mean the apple or the chair, right? But in computers, computers just have these bits. They don't have any meaning associated with anything. Okay. So once you have meaning, you have to have a mechanism for how meaning can be the basis for law of attraction.
Right.
What's the difference between asking for the law of attraction, the meaning, for having the pH of water go up 1 point versus down 1 point? That's a different meaning, right? And yet it works. So you have to be able to discriminate at the level of up versus down, right? For something as complicated as pH. Okay. So meaning is important for law of attraction. And it turns out there's a whole mathematics of hyperdimensional spaces called correlations. I worked in this area for 5 years, and I showed its correspondence equivalence to, got $100 million grant from the government to study neural and quantum computing. And that was part of my inspired path that I did, is I was looking for my next job when I finished my PhD, and all of a sudden this job shows up, and then it's perfect for what I do to write my book, and here, this is all 15 years ago, 20 years ago, practically. So the universe kept inspiring me and opening the doors to make sure that I learned all the stuff I need. And I go, why would I need to know about neural and quantum computing? And here's the reason. It's because we're neural quantum computers, and it's built on this hyperdimensional space. So you can go and see all my technical talks about what is correlative memories, okay? Another term is sparse distributed coding, Canova memories, correlative objects. But the math works, and I tell you that, because if it didn't, our cell phones wouldn't work. It's using CDMA, sparse distributed coding techniques. But think of it as a general quantum computing system that uses sparse distributed coding as its computing infrastructure. So not only do we communications with it, but we're doing all computing in that infrastructure too. So pattern recognition and stuff like that.
So taking that with what you said, how would we bring that into what we should become aware of in our everyday life from this point forward.
Yeah. Do what you are doing, do the lucid dreaming, do the meditation, do law of attraction. In other words, spending all our time watching the negative news, then we're attracting the wrong things, even if we hate it, we're still spending too much energy thinking about it. So we're still attracting it.
Yeah.
Right. So the one thing I've learned by all this, like even with the divisiveness that COVID is happening, right? It's like, I'd rather die than wear a mask. Okay. Your wish is my command, law of attraction. Right. But it's like, don't spend any energy on them, because otherwise you're just giving them your energy, right? So this is all law of attraction laws. I mean, this is what law of attraction tells you. And all my spiritual friends says, yeah, this is part of the awakening of our society, is to realize, we can't spend so much time spending all our time focusing on this negative thought, right, patterns, and we have to start focusing on positive thought patterns. So, but the other thing you can do with intention host devices, you can put an intention on it and broadcast it. And it actually affects things. So they've done experiments with Tiller's work where they worked with autistic kids and did that exact same thing, where they would broadcast to autistic kids, and it changed their behavior, because autistic children are really highly sensitive, energetic beings that don't interact with the physical world very well. And so there's Susie Miller, I talk about her in the book. So she works with kids who, she teaches their parents how to be telepathic with their kids. I mean, if you believe in anything, become telepathic. Now, my next language is going to be not German, not French, not Spanish, but a telepathic light language. So there's that's what I want to do.
I remember having Caroline Corey on here a few months ago. She made the documentary Superhuman, and I remember what they were doing with the children, being blindfolded, and then still being able to interact with the world around them was just. If that's not enough evidence that something greater is going on here, then I don't know what is.
Yeah. Plus, a lot of these people exhibit what I would call, this is a term from the law of attraction group. Actually, it's called infinite intelligence. The Abraham is considered to be an infinite intelligence. Okay, well, what does that mean? And it turns out we're all spiritual beings, so we're all infinite intelligence. We just have to learn to tap into it. And what does that mean? It means becoming more complex, having the lotus flower being even higher than the chakras that we know about, and having more and more complexity, more and more. How do you represent a hyperdimensional ball in a three-dimensional space? It looks like an aura, because we're only seeing a three-dimensional version of it. We're only seeing the shell, the surface of it, but all those dimensions are in there. And by the way, a black hole is also an infinite dimensional space. Everything you throw into a black hole just turns into bits. And so all the bits are the same kind of bits I'm talking about with the mind actually show up on the surface area of it. And the volume of the black hole is on its surface area. There's no inside of a black hole. And that's this notion of singularity and stuff like that. So all these things are tied together, and they're tied into the physics and math of hyperdimensional spaces.
I'll be listening to this podcast back myself a few times, I tell you, because there's so many moments of like, I'm getting it. But, my God.
Yeah. It's a story that weaves all of those ideas together, knowing that we are hyperdimensional beings. You could say we're spiritual beings, but we're hyperdimensional beings. And so we are outside of space, outside of time. We're separate from our brain, and people have trying to prove this, right? Dean Radin's with his double slit experiment. He shows your mind can directly affect this PK device, which is quantum experiment. Well, that's a perfect experiment, because guess what? There's no energy that can affect a quantum system, right? It's at the quantum states directly that's happened. So I use the terminology that our mind is of the same ilk. That's why I call it source science. Represents the same dimensions as the rest of the physics is for the universe. And so our mind can program. It's like the source code for the universe, for the source science. our mind, we can program anything we want in the universe. And that's why people can levitate and heal and do all this stuff, is because they're introducing order into a system that's really not closed. Entropy only works if you have a closed system. But if it's an infinite dimensional space, pulling the knot apart in 4 dimensions, if you have a back door to any system, no amount of electromagnetic shielding is going to keep you out of that locked room, right? Because you have a back door in it from a hyperdimensional space perspective.
And my mind here is thinking as well, it would be so amazing to be able to measure this really accurately with people and say, right, this is where you started when you started doing the work. And as we're going on, even to be measuring the entropy, and how much more order we bring it into ourselves. Like, I don't know if we're close, but it would be.
Yeah. Well, there are these metrics called power versus force by Hawking's. People do muscle testing stuff, and they can test whether you're from 0 to 1,000, where 1,000 is Christ. Yes. Right. And so that's the rudimentary measure of that right now. Okay. This is like a spiritual IQ. Okay. And you go, well, that seems interesting. Well, it turns out that just like regular IQ, 100 is considered normal, the average for intelligence, and sort of like the highest known IQ in the world is like 198 or something like that. Probably people above that, we can't even measure it, right? So the question is, what's the average for the spiritual IQ in Hawking's scale? And it turns out it's 200, just from 0 to, and it's a nonlinear scale. So, but when I test, people who are above 500 are considered pretty enlightened. And so you can go through this process and test yourself, or have people test you for you where you are in the scale. And the book itself, and the title Source Science, and the book itself tests at a 700. So this book was written, I only wrote it when I was inspired to do it. And so it has the book has a higher score on Hawking's scale than I do. But yet
the information is coming through you, essentially. Yeah.
Yes, that's what I'm trying to say with that. So there is a measure for it. And it turns out, using intention host devices, you can change. People usually thought, just like IQ, they think, well, you can't change the IQ of somebody, right? It's innate. Well, the spiritual IQ, they think, well, you couldn't change that either. It's not true. Intention host devices, they broadcast to people and change their spiritual IQ of people by combining more dimensions and changing their collective intelligence.
Amazing, right? Absolutely.
So those are all kinds. There's all this broadcast technology using intention host devices that could ultimately be.
Yeah. And it just keeps reinforcing me about how important it is to set your intention, have purpose and meaning behind each day. Get up in the right space, and what do I want to create today? Where do I want to come from?
You're so right on there. I love your 5-step process.
Absolutely.
That you're talking about.
I got a few questions for you. I ask everyone on the show before we wrap things up and that. But
sure.
One question that's coming to me is, how do you see the future of this going? Are you optimistic, with everything that's going on in the world and where you're at with your brain? Like, where's it taking you?
Yeah, I am quite as optimistic. I think spiritually we're going to survive no matter what, anyhow, right? Because we're eternal. So it's just whether or not we're going to script the planet before then, right? So I think, but that if humans can awake, right, and they can touch the divine, then they can realize that all of these bad decisions that collectively we're making, individually and collectively we're making, we can change the direction even faster than it is. And there's this, I don't know, that COVID did a nice thing because everybody went virtual for all these seminars. There are more seminars on these subjects than I could watch if I watched them solid all day. I would not get any work done if I watched them all day. So you can see all of these people who are having these transcendent experiences, telling their stories over and over again every day on the internet. And it's inspiring. It's inspiring.
Yeah, It is.
So,
I recorded a podcast with Jeffrey Thompson yesterday. I'm not sure if you're familiar with his work out in Los Angeles, and he's just broadcasting a YouTube live every week as well, and he's gone quantum and he's got some incredible information, and there's definitely a hunger for it. I just wonder sometimes, am I just looking through my little lens and I'm creating my reality the way I want to see it, which of course I am to a degree, but at the same time, I'm certainly optimistic the way things will move forward.
Yeah.
Yes, I am.
So you're optimistic too?
Definitely. Because even in our retreats we run, like we've run 8 now, and we're, and unfortunately because of this current circumstances, we had to postpone our most recent one. But if we can bring a collective group of strangers, like 35 people together, and within 3 nights create this unbelievable connected coherence within a group that is beyond words, that is connecting to something far greater than us. And these people a lot of them haven't even done the work before. And by the end of it, we're just like blown away. So to me, it just proves that we can change. Like if we choose to, if we want to step into that, we are not our circumstances. We can go beyond that.
Right. And we can accelerate this process by using these focus techniques, right? I'm pointing to the Monroe Institute as an example. He's a hero of mine too, because he's an engineer. The Tibetan monks would go to the Monroe Institute to see what it was all about, right? And they'd been just to see what it was about. And they says the week always started on Friday, and then it would go to Friday, and then the next group would come in. Okay, so they says on Wednesday, we get to a state with these tapes. They have tapes that guide your brain to change your brain frequency and stuff like that. You get to a state that would take us 20 years to get to in meditation in the mountains. So I believe that we can accelerate these techniques, like using Monroe Institute, using brain synchronization techniques and drumming and subtle energy techniques. And I've been wanting to do it. I haven't done it yet. I have my own meditation, which is an energy building meditation. And it combines sort of the best of class of attention, focus, breathing, all of those. And someday I'll put it out and make sure you get a link to it. So on my YouTube channel, it's like everybody I've exposed this to go, wow, I've never experienced anything like that before. It's like, and it's the same thing that you just said. You can actually know that something happened, that there's a lucidity, there's this consciousness, there's this feeling that there's something real here, and you can't ignore it anymore. You don't know what it is yet, but you know that you can't ignore it anymore. And that's
please get it out there.
I hope everybody can experience it.
That's for sure. So, what's your intention for this book?
My book is to kind of like set the vocabulary and the tone that this is real science, right? It's not metaphysics, it's protophysics, it's real. And I believe my book represents sort of like a business plan that says there's somebody out there who believes in in these ideas, not just what I'm doing, but believes in these ideas, and believes that we can go and invest as much money as we're doing in AI and quantum computing and space travel, and actually turn it from nobody wants to touch it because it's a hot potato to this is the hottest new technology that we can do. I mean, so it's essentially a business plan for an investor to come in who has a balance between science, spirit, and business. And and I talk about it in the book about what that means. So I believe there's somebody who has $50 million sitting around and doesn't know what to do with it, and that they would, and every time I think about that, people go, Doug, I believe you. I don't know when it's going to happen or how it's going to happen, but and it might be 20 years from now.
They might be listening to this right now.
But I think it's going to happen.
Who knows? That's amazing. Yeah, that's amazing. I have no doubt you'll achieve it without a shadow of a doubt. Absolutely. Yeah, good.
Yeah. So I think it's sort of like my life path is leading to that. And so far that's the clearest direction without setting any particulars about it.
Last question for you, Doug. And that is, with everything we've covered today, is there anything you'd like to leave the listeners to ponder on?
Yeah. I think your approach, which is helping people to experience this stuff with meditation and all of your people should figure out how to get in touch with this in their own personal thing. Through meditation, through lucid dreaming, through healing, through whatever, and realize that turn off the talk radio, the negative talk radio. Figure out law of attraction is real, and that we're spiritual beings, and that we're spiritual beings that represent real intelligence with meaning and intent and attention and infinite intelligence and infinite emotional intelligence too. Law of attraction is about emotional intelligence, right? So amplify. Imagine if there was joy and love that was 100 times more than you have ever experienced before. And people who have near-death experiences say that's what's out there. And they can't even talk. It's so beyond what we can experience. Yet people tend to focus on being 10 times angrier than they ever were before. So try to figure out how to get 10 times happier and loving and that you've ever been before, and figure out how to get into that state and stay in that state. Because if you're in that state, your emotional state is the dominant thing that attracts the law of attraction. It's the fuel that drives law of attraction, and you will attract whatever your intention is if you use the positive emotion for that.
Totally.
So that's my
beautiful.
And I talk about that.
Is your book on Audible by any chance?
It isn't yet. Yeah. So it's on, but it is available on Amazon.
Okay.
So
I will grab a copy. Doug, look, I just want to say thank you, mate. You're a bloody legend, and everything you shared today was phenomenal. Hey, and I'm so happy we connected and you came on the show. Honestly, it's just been a pleasure to. 100%.
We'll spread the word, because 100%. This is the same message we're all working on. So
it was just a great conversation. I have no doubt it'll happen again for sure. So Doug, thank you for everything you're doing.